The following is a presentation of the ForceCenter podcast feed.
From the center of the galaxy, this is the ForceCenter podcast feed, and this particular episode is one of our deep dives, our Bacta tank of talk. Come swim around with us. I'm Joseph Scrimshaw.
I'm Napzok. The squigglies are squiggling around, and we're going to swim.
That is right. Are we the squigglies, Ken? Are we being hunted, fished at by Dewey and Freedy?
Two of us, yes.
Yeah, that's the normal sporting term, right? Being fished at. That's how one talks about fishing. Anyway, we will be more eloquent about Star Wars than I can be about fishing. As always, we want to let you know that today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ForceCenter. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. This week, we're recommending Padawan by Kirsten White. We're going to be reviewing and discussing it soon, and then we will move on to recommending lots of other great Star Wars books that have come out recently. In particular, The High Republic back in action, and soon, hopefully, we will be devouring those as well. If you want to download an audiobook of Padawan or those High Republic books, you can go to audibletrial.com/ForceCenter. Again, that's audibletrial.com/ForceCenter for a free audiobook. But wait, we have more things to say. We have our new segment, Asking. Do you have a better title for our new segment, Ken?
ForceCenter Asks is seems to be our traditional way of approaching titles with ForceCenter in front of it, and it's an ask that's been updated thanks to all of you out there in our ForceCenter community. We've been asking to help us grow our YouTube presence. If you would find it in your heart and want to join that kind of quest, we asked for 6,500 subscribers, and happy to report that of the morning of this recording, we've passed that and are moving past it. So we're going to be bold. We're going to be brave. Fortune favors the brave, especially on YouTube. We are going to ask if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where some podcasts rebroadcasts, but also some additional new content's on the way, our live Q&As, all that kind of wonderful stuff. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell, and help us reach 7,000 subscribers. It's a ForceCenter Ask. Can we get up to the next big number? Thanks to all of those who've subscribed so far. We really appreciate the support. So, Joseph, that's our ForceCenter Ask. Dun, dun, dun. We'll get Tony Thaxton to do some music.
It is so well done. I want to call a toll-free number to get a tote bag. You did that very well and brought me back to my PBS days of watching those mentions, those requests, those asks in the middle of a Doctor Who episode.
Yes, or the Sunday morning movie. This is random. This is popped in my head. I mentioned Tony Thaxton's name. Maybe we don't mention his name as much. Someone on YouTube this morning actually asked if it was us doing the theme music or what's going on. And we want to shout out the great Tony Thaxton, who does all of our ForceCenter original theme music, from Happy Beeps to the main show, the new show, the Databank Brawl end theme, which is a rock track that needs to be released as a single in its own right. And Tony Thaxton is great. He's a drummer for Motion City Soundtrack. He has his own wonderful podcast. Check out Bizarre Albums. But yeah, I thought about the day because we haven't mentioned his name in a while, and we have a lot of new listeners who've popped on the last year or so. So thank you, Tony, for making us sound so good.
Yeah, huge shout out to Tony, and I believe you can find it probably just by Googling Tony Thaxton and Star Wars. He also has a great album of weird Star Wars songs, just singing the praises, literally, of different weird Star Wars characters. So be sure to check that out as well. Very good call, Candace. Shout out good old Tony Thaxton. We are done with all of our intro business, which means we can dive into our main topic for the day, and kind of thinking of this episode as loving the fantasy side of Star Wars. We're going to talk about the value of the fantastic, the strange, the pulpy, the sort of genre stew of Star Wars. Everything from lightsabers to aliens to robots to evil tree caves to hungry mouths that just happen to live in the desert and beyond. We want to talk about why we feel that they're not something to be kind of distracted by, endured, looked past, but actually a vital part of the Star Wars magic. So we are definitely going to celebrate what we love about this sort of fantastic side of Star Wars. But we also want to be honest, some of this conversation is coming up because of some of the discourse around Andor. This episode, and none of our episodes, is a dig on the actual television show Andor. We loved Andor, and we love that so many people loved it. A small amount of people in social media discourse and reviews kind of were real negative about the more fantastic aspects of Star Wars in praise of everything that is wonderful about Andor.
Mm-hmm.
And that just got me. Obviously, we talked about on our breakdown of Andor season 1 that really raised our hackles. The disparaging the fantastic side of Star Wars, but it also made us think that we should just really spend an episode celebrating why it's important, why we love the fantastic in the weird in Star Wars. Ken, do you have any thoughts to that? Just sort of a perspective of this episode.
Yeah, this is one of those things where, there's definitely this discourse. We addressed it in a bigger way on the show this week on the recap, but it causes me to ask, like, all right, cool. Well, what do I love about that other side of it? What do I want to celebrate, and how do I engage with it? Because that's been a weird journey for me over the years. I'm part of that generation that sat in the theater in 1999 and went, too magical. I've changed. In fact, we're discussing some things that I list today that I even on ForceCenter used to be kind of putting my fist down. Also, I have some stuff in here that's a defense of Andor and different styles in Star Wars. So it's all part of the fun, but in a traditional ForceCenter fashion, I'm excited to focus on those things that do cross over into fantasy and magic and just plain weirdness.
Yeah, it's kind of a big catch-all for the genre side of Star Wars. And I think that's one of the really fun things about Star Wars. I'm using the phrase genre stew. All these different ingredients are thrown in there. And I think that's a natural part of it for fans to have different opinions about, whoa, this stew has too much of this ingredient.
Yeah.
Back off on the cinnamon. Cinnamon doesn't really belong in a stew, does it? And other people are like, man, give me as much cinnamon as possible. And I think that is part of what can be fun about the discussion of Star Wars. So with that spirit in mind, a spirit of, is that too much cinnamon? We are going to dive into this discussion. Ken, what do you think of first when you try to capture the weird or fantastic side of Star Wars?
So here's what I did. Here's my exercise. Show them and work on this. I literally sat down, I had my laptop open, and your first question comes up here for me. And I, instead of trying to go deep or profound, I was like, let me just close my eyes. And I literally said, when I think of this, or I read this question myself, what pops to my mind? And here's where I went. I think of the Rancor. I think of Jabba the Hutt. I think of the Sarlacc Pit. I think of a hero swashbuckling through it all, because that's what pulled me into Star Wars. That was the first big thing, both in the trailer, both in sitting down and Return of the Jedi, and the battle on Endor, the ships, the X-Wings, the Y-Wings, all that stuff that kind of slid in, maybe even to the pole position, some of my rankings as a youngster. It was this magical, what is going on? I'm terrified of the Rancor. I think I'm terrified of Jabba. There's a hole in the ground, like you said earlier. Whether you add in the special edition version or not, it's kind of the same thing. And it was just kind of this weird but fantastic. In the middle of it all, one of my favorite things as a child was Luke dropping off the skiff and doing that flip back up. I tried to reenact that slowly, not by getting no air as a kid. That was, and I've written about this and I talked about this, that opening sequence was the thing most reenacted on the playground for me and my friends. We had this weird old contraption built of wood and rusted metal. It was a different time in the 80s, kids, for school. And we played on that, and it was perfect for that sequence. And it has all these things, a weird monster, action, aliens, and you couldn't quite attach it to the real world. And I start with that. That's what pulled me in. Then I go to other places like Dagobah. We just discussed that on Datamink Dive. I think even later on the rocks, revealing the Bendu. The rocks kind of suddenly, it's this big Bendu creature. It's hard for me not to talk about Mortis, especially the first time, because Mortis and the visions and what was talked about was the first time I felt Clone Wars was speaking to me, and I'm a pew, pew, pew guy. And I became that later on. War over lore, all kind of stuff. But Mortis was the first time I was like, I haven't been digging deep into Clone Wars yet when this episode dropped. And that it got to me because it was magical, not because it was clones fighting. And I even think of Luke Skywalker saying, something's alive in here, and being pulled under the water by a Dianoga, and how mystical, magical, and weird that was for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think your key point that when you try to picture things, it's what drew you in as a kid because it was bizarre and different, and then as you get older and some of the bizarre and different becomes normalized, what sort of re-shocks you back to the what is this perspective that you had as a kid, that sort of weird thing that makes you want to lean in and learn more, or maybe makes you want to lean away in the way a great horror thing does, of like, I am both attracted to and repulsed by the Rancor.
Yeah. Wow. Terrifying.
It's too scary. And yeah, the absolute essential childhood. That's so weird and cool. I want to do it. I know it's not physically safe for me to do it for many reasons, but I want to try anyway. That's what we like about it. It's dangerous to children. Joking. Totally joking.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think of, I did your mental exercise as you were describing it, because I hadn't done that of, okay, just close my eyes. First two things that pop in my head. First thing, absolutely lightsaber. It's just essential. It we can joke about, laser swords, but they have depth, they have meaning, but they also capture your imagination. We are all Star Wars kids. Anybody who has watched or even mildly enjoyed Star Wars at some point has picked something up long and cylindrical and pretended it's a lightsaber and made the whoosh whoosh noises with your mouth. Strangely, here's the second thing that came into my head. The famous Star Wars character Megaloof. I think there's just something that captures that really bonkers, silly side of Star Wars is why it's popped into my head. The only reason I know Megaloof is a 2-second background character in Attack of the Clones, in the chase when Kenobi is hanging off of the assassin droid, the courier droid. The only reason I know Megaloof's name is, for some reason, Megaloof has a prominent entry on the StarWars.com databank. And all the times I've been scrolling through there, I'd be like, Megaloof, who's that? It's the weird little alien in traffic who goes, ah! That's it. That's the whole thing, but that it captures some of the weirdness of Star Wars, that character has a name, and for some reason I know it. Some days I forget how old I am, but I remember Megaloof. So those are the images that popped to my mind that I think spread, right? Everything from the absolutely like silly bonkers meant to be comedy. It's a silly name. It's silly that I know it, to like the depth in the meaning and the fun and the thrill of a lightsaber. All that to me is kind of under this sort of fantastic umbrella. And I think kind of going a little bit deeper, I think what is often compelling is that so many of these things that we can list when you're trying to capture the weird or the fantastic side, everything from Dagobah to the Rancor, they are relatable to the real world. They are understandable. It's a sword or a car or a scary animal, but at the exact same time, it's strange, it's otherworldly, it's dreamlike. I think that's what really causes the lean in. I think that's one of the big powers of the fantastic, things that feel both shockingly new and just fundamentally ancient, right? Human beings have had reason to be frightened of large animals that they have perhaps pissed off for our entire existence. But we've never really seen a Rancor. Not many of us have been dropped into a pit because we were trying to rescue our friend Captain Solo. I think that's to me a little bit of a big power and big way I identify them. Lightsabers are swords. The Falcon is a broken down hot rod. The swarm of Geonosians lurking in the dark cave feels like, hey, what if you fell into, a bee's honeycomb, all of a bee's hive, I guess. All of these things feel relatable, but also utterly bizarre at the same time.
Yeah, well said. When we dive into why it's important, we'll explore that a little more, I'm sure. But you're, even as you're talking about it, you're listing things that I think I have become so normal for me as a Star Wars fan. Yeah, the Geonosian hive, right, is totally fantastic, and it stood out at the time, but it's just become wonderful wallpaper for me, which is also part of the magic too. When you're pulled into this world, when you're so used to the whoosh whoosh of a lightsaber, all else almost seems normal, which I love.
Yeah, and maybe that can be a challenge sometimes if we get too used to some of these things.
Yeah, maybe.
So let's dive into this idea. I'm going to say dive 8,000 times on this podcast. Why is the fantastic important to Star Wars? Why is it not something that needs to be looked past or endured, but something to absolutely be valued? Why is it important?
Yeah, this is where I wanted to maybe force myself to dig a little deeper. So I don't mean to be ever melodramatic or overdramatic at all with my thoughts on this, but it's tremendously important to not just Star Wars, but any kind of genre stuff. You and I were even discussing that with Jennifer earlier in the week, and I think it pulls you away from your own world enough, right? It just helps you disconnect with the mundane and find the fantastic, and it's a trip, baby. And when I believe you can see yourself a little more clearly, it removes the obstacles to you connecting deeper. Meaning, for me, what that means when I say that is, you might watch a very realistic portrayal of, say, maybe a drama, and it's set in an inner city, right? And you might get it, but you're going to say, well, that's not me, right? I'm not seeing my story here. Or you're watching something. I'm not an accountant that's a serial killer, so I'm not listening to what this story has to say to me. And you can see it as a real world thing, where in Star Wars, man, I picked up a lot of lessons by going, "Ooh, I wish I was a space scoundrel." There's no obstacles to me thinking this. I can dream this. Or maybe I'm talking about, maybe there's some important lessons for your life, or maybe there's some inspirations to take from some of the other stories, whether it be an accountant who's a serial killer, and maybe not, but an inner city drama or something like that. But there's probably other lessons and inspirational things in there, but maybe you don't connect with it as much. Where in Star Wars, we're hopefully all on equal footing. We can all dream to be the hero saving the day, or the scoundrel, or the princess who's running the rebellion, and you can just kind of see it in a different light, and then connect with it in that sort of way. And then on the flip side, it's the power of even creators, especially at times, being able to address things kind of maybe behind a veil. You and I, Jennifer, were citing comic books, looking at X-Men being coming out in the 60s and civil rights. That's a big one for me to look at, and it was overlooked at the time, but they could get the story in. Maybe it wouldn't the other ways. Star Trek, you mentioned Star Trek as well, the original series. Kirk and Uhura, we know this very important pop culture but social moment of their kiss. And perhaps no one was looking because it was Star Trek on the network side. We can't do that. Well, it's in space. And it's just a general way of looking at it, of both the power and the importance. As a fan, I'm able to, and always was able to, be transported away and get the lessons without maybe knowing I'm getting the real world lessons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's really great. I think, it's something that Lucas has talked about in interviews, whether it was, entirely front of his mind when he was making Star Wars, or whether he kind of looked back and realized the power of what he had created. However you choose to interpret some of his interviews, I think there's an awareness that let's make this fun and exciting. Let's make this a world that you want to disappear into. And then when you are ready to hear the ideas, this will be a fun, exciting galaxy that you want to go to in your imagination. And then when you want to sink in and think about it and think like, am I given into the dark side? You have a framework to think about that, right?
Yeah.
I just did a rewatch of The Wire earlier this year, which I absolutely love. And, very, very different approaches, but The Wire is largely about, a lot of times individuals mean the best toward one another, but they get caught up in structural dysfunction. They get caught up in personal greed of like, yeah, that'd be better for the big picture, but what would I lose? Right. And that's the story that Star Wars is telling in the prequels of, so I think your point of Star Wars does handle big ideas, but it presents them to you in fun, bizarre, scary packages, but packages that make you, especially younger people, lean in and go, I want to spend some time there. And then the big question, the big hope is, can and do people make that transition from the exciting shell, the exciting images, and get into the big ideas and make them meaningful in their own lives?
Yeah, this is a general sweep through this, and other people have written about it. We've mentioned it before, but the difference between Lucas and Kurtz finishing Star Wars and thinking they're going to race towards Apocalypse Now, there's a giant story as to why that didn't happen, and Coppola and all this kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. Apocalypse Now is this great cinematic masterpiece discussed in film school. That's where I watched it first, right? And then the story behind it and the craziness behind it. Lucas goes off and continues, actually after American Graffiti, and then he goes and makes Star Wars. He arguably, again, am I being melodramatic? Maybe I am, Joseph. But he changes the world along with everyone else with Star Wars. Where Apocalypse Now, I don't think is viewed the same way. Inside cinema, it's different, and the ideas might be important or what is discussed. But I think that difference, you're not getting rid of. I'm not saying get rid of Apocalypse Now, but I'm so glad Lucas was like, maybe I need to focus on the same ideas for a younger crowd that's going to stick with them a lot longer, maybe change hearts for a lot more, for a lot more generations to come.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, obviously, for some fans, the fantastic, the weird, the silly is a distraction to those big ideas. And I think that's been a power of Andor that we've talked about, that Andor is explicit. You can't miss these central ideas of Star Wars, whereas in other Star Wars properties, maybe sometimes people miss them. And I think that's kind of what leads us to this conversation of like, okay, then in the big picture, is the weird, the fantastic, the silly a distraction? And to me, no. And for a couple of reasons why the fantastic is important. I love everything that you're saying about how it brings you into the ideas. I think one of the ways that it brings you into the ideas is making you feel them in your gut. Not, I think most people's first encounter with Star Wars is not to intellectualize it. It is to feel it. I think some of the fantastic, specifically like fantasy ideas, make Star Wars feel timeless and ancient. I might be extra partial to that because I think it was particularly the approach of the original trilogy, down to specific lines about things being dreamlike and literally ancient. But this feeling of like evil wizards, dark forests, heroes' blades, something more out there for you, your rogue scoundrel friend that you meet along the journey who can make a better choice to help you out, right? A leader who's lost their power but is reclaiming it, really, in some ways, with Leia being the princess of a dead world. There's so many of these ideas that are baked into lots of storytelling, lots of it, Eurocentric, but certainly other places as well, in other ways. But it feels timeless and ancient. So I think that is a power of the fantastic, that it makes it feel like it isn't just one-to-one. It's not just talking about, this serial killer in this accounting firm in the year 2021 or whatever.
By the way, I don't think there is an accounting serial killer movie. I'm just making it up in my head, and there should be.
I think there's an accounting hitman, right? That's Ben Affleck. And then, of course, Dexter is, the serial killer with a day job. Anyway, we'll talk about those on a different podcast. My point is, I think it feels, the fantastic makes it feel like these are problems that humans, us in the real world, have always had. These are challenges we've always faced. And how are we going to face them this time? What do we need? What tools do we need to face them this time? So that's a big one for me. Another huge one for me is just the value of imagination, right? It's appreciating the imagination of the creators. You talked about being drawn in by just the visuals, right? Just the sights and the sounds, the Rancor and the lightsaber and Luke's cool flip. I could not agree with that more. I've talked about it a bunch, but I feel like growing up in the 80s was growing up in a very beige world. Everything was sad and boxy, and I can appreciate a lot more of the television of the time now, putting it as an adult and putting it in historical context. But just like everything was just like they're in cars and they're driving, and now they're in their large beige suits having a conversation in a large beige room, and this is just almost sad. And then here's this explosion of ideas and monsters and heroes and spaceships and weird aliens, and it just, Star Wars made me feel alive. And I think there's the imagination that's on screen that's valuable. But then there's this big idea of what does translating the imagination that the creators have had to build this fantastic world, what does it matter to people, to young people watching it, right? It encourages imagination. I think you watch Star Wars and you go, what kind of monster would I make? What kind of planet that has never been there before can I imagine? What kind of scary Sith Lord can I imagine? And some people sit down and draw it. Some people sit down and write it. When you and I were young, we played it with our action figures, and this is one of those discussion points that has come up around Andor of, Favreau and Filoni up to point have quotes about how the Mandalorian is inspired by their action figure play. And I think people have maybe taken that out of context and focused on action figure play is a sign of nostalgia or just being tied to your own youth, or it is a sign of immaturity. We don't want big ideas. We just want to bash our action figures together. And out of context, I can see how people would receive it that way. But to me, what Favreau has been saying in The Mandalorian is the height of the value of the fantastic side of Star Wars. When Favreau and people of his generation were playing with action figures, it was imagination being unlocked by seeing the creator's imagination on screen. It was taking that Boba Fett action figure in your hand and going, I am so compelled by this person, but I know next to nothing about this character in my hand. What can I dream? It's the farthest thing from nostalgia or immaturity to me. It's, I love what I saw on screen. How can I be part of it? How can I add my creativity to it? I think the fantastic and the bizarre encourages others to dream fantastic and bizarre. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that one.
I love this point. It's almost even a forgotten point and forgotten side of it all, of how Star Wars or anything like this. Lord of the Rings is another example of something that was decades upon decades and has influenced a lot of people in a lot of different areas. I think for you and me, you're even reminding me of not just the times I play with my action figures, and I'll put a pin in that statement there, but this caused me to get out pen and paper, and probably a mechanical pencil with a weird topper. It was the 80s after all, and write my own stories that were horrible. But it was the first time I used to say, I want to be like George Lucas. I guess now it just means I eat it in food courts and wear comfortable clothing. But then it was something different. And putting my ideas out in the world. And what that means, I was the kid, and I'm not alone in this. This is why this is so powerful. But I was, the kid who had all the space Lego sets, but also had character names for them and had ongoing plots and serialized my adventures after school every day, to the point where it probably drove some of my kids crazy. And I'm not alone in that. But on the flip side, it's the people that go into science. And Star Trek definitely inspires that, maybe more directly. But there's a lot of Star Wars, a lot of wonder, and there's room to interpret these stories and room to grow them. And the action figure thing, when, yes, taken out of context, I get what people mean by that, but I also really don't. I struggle with, it's just playing with your action figures, because it implies that there's nothing of value in those stories, or that there was nothing of value in what we were doing as kids, and the stories we were building and the lessons we were learning and what we're infusing into it. I see it as fun. I understand the nostalgia trap. Star Wars is based in nostalgia. You and I have discussed that, the old and the new. I've talked to my friends who were 20 when New Hope came out, and I've asked my friend Dan Farron directly. So when you saw that serial footage, the Flash Gordon-like thing, the crawl, what did that do to you? Because I know you were a fan. He goes, I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. So excited. Before even the Star Destroyer comes over, I was so excited. Like, oh my gosh, that's that thing. And that's not a bad thing, because my friend Dan and many others aren't staying there in this forever locked youth. It's taking what's there and applying new things to it and telling stories. And I don't even have the energy to fight it back. I love what you're saying about the imagination side of it and connecting, because that's where a lot of our own ideas are formed, not just creative storytelling, but who we are. What stories are we telling with those figures? Who's winning in these stories? I don't know. It all spills out of it, and it is part of the fun. And then the flip side of this, the imagination side, is watching the Light and Magic doc and seeing a bunch of crazy kind of sort of hippies or former hippies on motorcycles with mustaches and leather bands around their arms, like my dad had, in a room in a Van Nuys airport adjacent warehouse, just going wild with, there's no boundaries on what you can create. We just, unless we can do it. And that's part of the magic of this as well. And that's present in everything. And by the way, I think a quick Andor note, I think Andor is very timely, because I think it is speaking, and this is maybe where it can get convoluted, but it's speaking to those who just kind of put the action figures on the shelf and said there's no value in that, and moved on decades ago. And I think Andor needed to grab them by the lapels and say, Star Wars has a lot to say. Here it is in its bare form. I think that's one of the big victories of Andor. but don't leave that imagination behind. Don't leave the imagination that you had as a child, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I think I'm sure we all had different experiences with our action figures, but I've told stories here. Like I definitely just had them, ignite their not well rendered plastic lightsabers at the time back in the 80s and fight. Sometimes my brother and I would set up all of our Cantina creatures, and we would have a blaster fight across the room with rubber bands. It shocks my heart now to think of shooting a classic Kenner action figure with a rubber band. It definitely had like just imaginative play excitement. But I also, the first thing I did with my Ben Kenobi action figures, try to have Luke Skywalker rescue him from death, and had a conversation with my mom about what death is. It's a joke, but Han Solo was frozen in carbonite, and so I had my Cloud Car pilot try to see if he could date Leia, and had Leia turn him down. I was working through real things with those action figures as well, so like I think when I totally get what people are saying, Andor is it is so grounded, it is so real, it is so into the depth of the characters, and it has so much value. But when people are like, just action figure Star Wars versus gritty Star Wars, like, well, I might have played Desmond Mothma allow her daughter to be married at a disturbingly young age. I might have played that with my action figures. Maybe you wouldn't, but I did. Okay,
this is because your Cloud Car pilot story comes up every now and then. It's one of my favorite things, right? That this guy just was so bummed that swashbuckling Solo got the princess. I love it. I collected G.I. Joe a lot, like a lot of folks too, and played those like crazy. And I had an ongoing storyline because in the comics, Destro and the Baroness were in love, right?
Okay.
I had an ongoing story that Destro was caught cheating on the Baroness with Zorana, Zartan's sister. I'm 9. Like, I don't even know what this means. So stop acting like, again, I don't understand what it means, but stop acting like playing with the action figures is only bashing them against walls and putting firecrackers to them. I had an ongoing storyline of Baroness and Destro working all this out.
Yeah, no, and I get the tension that I think we're talking about is if Star Wars is fresh and exciting, then there's a fear of leaning too into staying, with the Star Wars that you first knew. And I think that's what people are talking about with the action figures. I just don't think that's what's happening, which is maybe a taste, an opinion thing. Final kind of big picture point that I wanted to share and ask you about, Ken, about why the fantastic is important to Star Wars is I think there's this huge theme that runs through so much of Star Wars that everyone matters. It is explicit in some stories, the realization that the Naboo don't think the Gungans are less than them, the victory on Endor because the Empire does not see how a bunch of teddy bears with natural weaponry could be frightening. The first broadcast episode of the Clone Wars where Yoda takes time to tell the clones they are not cannon fodder. They are all unique beings in the Force. You can find it a million different places in a million different ways. And even when Star Wars kind of missteps in others, somebody the way that the Tuscans had been. Look at all the great storytelling we've had coming around saying, nope, it always mattered. Everyone matters. And if somebody's been overlooked in Star Wars or treated poorly, let's go back and let's give them perspective. Let's give them agency because everyone matters. I think the fantastic in Star Wars, the absolute deep, the profound being married to the absurd is a reminder that everyone in everything matters. I think the fantastic in Star Wars is kind of like Luke's relationship with Yoda on Dagobah in The Empire Strikes Back. Yeah. As a fan, I want to be the Luke who realizes, oh, wow, the little green frog guy is not less than. The little green frog guy is exactly what I'm looking for and has the wisdom that I absolutely need. The little green frog guy is not an annoyance to be endured. He's the point because everyone matters. Don't judge people by the surface. Don't judge genre by the surface. Look for the ideas underneath the same way Luke looked with more mature eyes and saw Yoda for what he truly is.
It's a great example to kind of summarize and put it all into a nice little bowl of root leaf stew. It's absolutely the truth. And Luke's face when he realizes his mistake is timeless and priceless and full of important lessons. I don't think it's small, like Yoda. I think it's important. I think it's the purpose, and I think it was why I think Star Wars continues to work following New Hope because of that. They put all this hope on a puppet. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating just from a real world perspective, but it was also needed. I'm looking for a great warrior. Found him. You have that's amazing. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yoda he's imagination. He is silly. He's bonkers. He's audacious. He's creative, right? And all in support of being like the pillar of some of the big ideas of Star Wars. It's really, really meaningful to me. So we've talked a lot about why we value the fantastic, but I want to get to something that I think I know you've wrestled with. I think many fans have. Are there ever parts of Star Wars that are so fantasy or fantastic based that you have a hard time taking the story around them seriously?
Yeah, there's a list. It's interesting too. ForceCenter 2015. I might have been. I always say I'm one turn away from being an angry YouTube car guy. Thankfully, I'm not. But back then, there was just kind of what you did, and you found the negative first. Not just because it got you clicks, because that was more fun. I think you could derive comedy from going, this sucks, and let me make fun of it. And I think even when we started ForceCenter, I was emerging from that kind of discussion world. And so therefore, I butted up against a lot of things and would cite a lot of things. I think I would have been like, Andor is the only kind. So I think I kind of get some of the conversation around it, but then just want to yank people through to the other side. I'm not saying my journey is the only journey. That's something we preach against here as well. But to this list here, I start with some of the things that I've mentioned over and over again. But Meeber Gascon, D-Squad, the Sunny Day in the Void episode, the Clone Wars, was my number one. How the hell is this in Star Wars while all this other stuff that's serious is happening, right? I couldn't comprehend it. And then you and I on a Clone Wars rewatch, I was looking forward to get to that because I just had a sense I'd probably see it again for the first time. And wow, did I ever. But I was held up by that. It's a frog guy. And he's not even like a Mon Calamari, a human-sized squid or,
No, and he's doing pretty broad comedy, right?
Yes.
For a lot of it. The comedy has meaning, but on the surface, he's just doing this guy's an idiot jokes.
Yeah, and the wonderful Stephen Stanton doing I'm a frog voice, and it's wonderful. But back then, it just was like, couldn't believe it. And then, my early reviews of Star Wars Rebels, space whales, puffer pigs. And if it seems like I'm picking on animation, because I think animation is more easily untethered from the docks of reality, and it could push Star Wars further into that fantastical realm. And so it gave me the excuse to say, well, this isn't for me, and this is silly, and you're wasting Lando on a pig that puffs. By the way, that's still not necessarily one of my favorite things, but I own a puffer pig, and thank you to the Star Wars ForceCenter fan. I can't remember who mailed me that, because every time I squeeze it, it makes a puffer pig sound, and I laugh. And I connect with it different. And again, none of this has to be for you. That's totally fine. But returning to those episodes now and meeting them where they want to live, where the themes are, and digging into those themes, I discovered that there is value not just for others, but there is a value for me, a thematic connection between this and the rest of the saga. And again, more importantly, others. And the big test in this, we're going to mention him at some point. You mentioned the Gungas and the Boo, but the big test is Jar Jar Binks. Absolutely the big dividing line, I think, for a lot of folks. And that was me in 99. You and I have talked, and You Squeeze Me will never be our favorite lines. But man, to now go back and see the great value in it, because I started to understand what he meant, not just for younger people, but for others. And this is all in reverse, by the way, because maybe Rogue One and Andor are too grounded for some of you out there. Maybe you do want Aki dancing and more pulp and more zip. I've talked to a lot of Star Wars fans, but someone needs to see Star Wars like that, Rogue One and Andor. Someone needs to see that right now and be moved by that. And this is why they can all live in harmony.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying. And I think I'd never want to take taste away from it or age, right? Like I've come to really love Jar Jar. Jar Jar didn't land for me in 1999 because some of his humor is specifically like, hey, have you never seen a funny guy trip around because you're that young? Here you go. And like I had seen that. Stepping in poo-poo is not the height of humor to me. But I love what you're saying is that Star Wars is weird and complex in that it has everything from very silly, very broad jokes to like the most serious. How do we give in to fear as a society and throw our own freedom away? And what are we willing to do to get it back? What horrible sacrifices do we have to make to get that freedom back? It can be everything in between those. It is everything in between those, and sometimes at the same time. And I love what you're saying about depending on where you are in your journey as a human, even regardless of age, like what part of the Star Wars stew do you need to be the prominent ingredient to draw you in? Yeah. So I mean, I think there's taste things. I think there's sort of like maturity things. In terms for myself, like I was really racking my brain for something so bizarre, so fantastic that I have a hard time taking the rest of the story seriously. And I think in terms of just like, I've never been phased by names like Phasma or Attack the Clones. I love those because they come from the exciting roots of Star Wars, of the adventure serial and the pulp and the fantastic and all that stuff at the time was meant to be thrilling and bright and lurid to try to draw you in and go, what is that? What does that mean? So the fantastic, I think, never bumps for me. I understand like how it can be like, if it really seems like, oh, we're just doing wizards and warlocks and little hobbit guys again. Oh, okay. I can understand how that can be a barrier for people looking for the bigger idea, but the fantastic never bumps for me. When I really look at what bumps for me, sometimes if it's the humor is a little bit more directed at a younger age. I've been rewatching Rebels and I'm just really enjoying so much about it. It's not all the humor's for me because it's directed at a slightly younger age. Fine. I think when I bump is actually when we move away from the fantastic and get into a kind of too real world. Like Foden Bede. I was going to say like, Foden Bede, the announcers in the at the pod race. That's where it gets too fantastic. Like, no, it's not too fantastic at all. It's like they sound too much like real world announcers, and they're making, in our universe type jokes. Like, I don't care what universe you're from. That's gotta hurt. It's like Vader's dad joke. That's in Rogue One. That one never lands for me, and I have reasons why. I've enumerated in the past. I can enumerate again in the future. But I realize, like, but that's the exact opposite. It's because it's too real world. I love all the real world emotion in Star Wars. I love all the real world awful choices and conflicts that people are facing in Andor. Tim Carlos socks. I could have used like maybe a little electric line running up them. Give me something. Give me something to make them fantasy. Does he have little creatures that hold up his socks? That'd be even better for me. So I don't think I ever struggle with the fantastic. I love it so much. It's in fact when Star Wars on the surface, not in the emotional reality, but in the sort of surface, the world building gets a little too real world. That's what bumps for me rather than the fantastic.
It's weird because, I was infamously not impressed with the name Captain Phasma at first. By the way, it doesn't even faze me now, but back then, and I was one of in 2002, Attack the Clones. What is this going to be, 50 sci-fi? And the answer is yes. And I think sometimes those names or those moments, and again, I'm not saying that anyone out there has to absolutely love the character of Meeber Gascon. I'm not saying that. But I think of some of those moments, you might be reminded that what you're investing in maybe isn't what you think, and you recalibrate from there. And either maybe this is the dividing line of maybe you leave it in the past, because putting your toys on the shelf up is something you and I always talk about. I think it's fine if you do. It's okay. But for an entire generation, it was demanded of us. Put your imagination on the shelf. Get to work, kid.
Learn about mortgages. Yeah.
Work starts at 9. You better be there. Which again, totally fine. But you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Where it's like, I think Attack the Clones, that name comes out, and I literally I didn't have a podcast then, but it's just like, what is this going to be, 50 sci-fi? And the answer is absolutely, to its core. That's what this is about. And you and I, in analyzing even, Dexter Jettster and his wonderful diner. Your great point that it literally starts with nostalgia, the comfort of it. And that's why Kenobi seeks it out, and it becomes more powerful. And it's like, and then I still got folks who are like, what? but it's a 50s diner. And it's like, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Ask yourself why. As well as just being it's kind of cheeky, and I'm okay with the cheeky. And I think back at certain points in my life, I haven't been, and that's why those things bump. And it's a good litmus test. And there's no failing the test. There's just, you find out what you truly like.
Yeah. No. Dexter is an everyone matters point in Star Wars, and it ties to noir, where the detectives who really knew the city knew the right people to ask, who actually know what's going on, the people that everybody else thinks is less than and couldn't possibly have important knowledge, like some greasy spoon diner owner. That's powerful to me. And I love what you're saying about the Meeber Gascon arc. I just think there's maybe the surface isn't for you. Maybe it's too broad. Maybe he's too fantastic. Maybe it's too much droid squawking for you. But which is fine. Those things are taste based. But if you want an idea, I've had a quote from that arc, like on the top of my little everyday to do notes that I make every day of what do I have to do today. There's a large part of that is that arc is about Meeber talking big, but being full of fear. And it's a great R2 arc where R2's just like, nope, just plow forward. You gotta. And there's that tension where Meeber just wants to stay at this crashed ship when they're in this terrifying void. And R2 accepts like, well, we're just going to rot and die if we stay on the ship. We have to go. As terrifying as it is, we have to go explore the empty void. And then they come across a ship where the people didn't leave and there are rotted corpses in there. And R2 beeps at Meeber, this is what happens when you stay on the ship.
and we discussed this last year in Clone Wars Report, but in hearing you discuss it right now, what is R2 saying? He's saying, Meeber, don't you want to give yourself to something more? He's quoting Luthen. He's quoting Luthen, people.
You're going to die either way. You can die here at the ship, or you can die making a difference. Yeah, I think Luthen and R2 would get along gangbusters.
I was going to say maybe Luthen is quoting R2 is the right way to say that.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting lost discussing what we love about specific episodes and specific fantastic things. You're talking about with Attack of the Clones. It's the reason I liked it from the beginning. I like all these genres that Star Wars pulls from, and I think in people's minds sometimes Star Wars becomes its own genre, and it becomes what it means to them, and I think people can kind of lose sight of the actual history of what Star Wars is pulling from. It pulls from so many genres, and I think it tries to put them through the Star Wars filter. But we're talking about like Western films, samurai films, classic sword and sorcery fantasy, futuristic and dystopian science fiction, kaiju, big monsters, grounded political thriller, gangster movies with a lot of Jabba stuff and Han stuff. Cosmic, almost Lovecraftian horror with some of the beasts you encounter. Gullet is, practically a spawn of an old one. Got Roman gladiator arena type stuff going on in Attack of the Clones. Film noir, you got Han and Leia and lots of other characters. Kanan and Hera having kind of these classic Hollywood romance vibe. A ton of appreciation for silent and early film comedy duos. You got some Laurel and Hardy stuff going on in the final episode of Andor with the inexplicable hat switch. There's so many genres. So what for you is the importance of Star Wars kind of being this genre stew?
This might be a simple, more direct answer, but my gut reaction to this is, number one, I just honestly think it's part of the fun. You talk about the imagination earlier. The Zillo Beast arc is another one that I think upon me revisiting it, I got a little bit more, because I've never been a monster kaiju fan, right? But then you dig into just Godzilla itself and what it meant for those films, what they were talking about. The themes behind it are pretty powerful, right? And so to have Star Wars play with that, have someone like Filoni be like, yeah, I was influenced by that, and I'm going to put it in the story so I can tell that same kind of story, both in fun ways and profound ways, to a new generation. I just think it's part of the fun. It's part of George's template. And I don't think George's template has to be copied beat for beat here on out. I think that's part of what's going on too. I think even George might say, yeah, don't follow my template too much, because I didn't do it myself. And I get that. But I also think Star Wars is its own genre now in a weird way, right? It's so weird. But maybe this is reiterating what we said earlier, but I think just all these things, all these genres are just different way different ways for the Star Wars creators to dress up the art, and different ways to deal with heavier thoughts and lessons. And they are all saying something. You're talking about the noir of Attack of the Clones and looking into the history of it there. I think of what noir films meant as well. I think it's important stuff. But at the end of the day, I love the discussions around it of people, oh man, Solo's kind of like a Star Wars Western. Like there's a lot of Star Wars Westerns in it, Westerns in Star Wars. But you're thinking of the Jedi episode in Mando. Filoni's, the samurai influence, which popped up a lot. The Maul Kenobi battle. I just think it's great ways to use previous genre, previous styles of art, and throw it in the Star Wars world and connect with other people who maybe like me don't connect with some of that stuff. I don't know how many film noir films I've taken in my life. Not a lot. Studied it in screenwriting, played that LA Noire video game. That's about as far as I got. I kind of like it. I might do a Mid-Atlantic voice sometimes when I'm drunk or something, but like the lessons in it are going to be lost on me. It needs to come to me through Star Wars. I think it's part of the value.
Yeah, and I can see some people who are maybe like hardcore fans of specific genres, even experts in them, would be like, oh, well, it's just the trappings of noir, and like. But that is, I think it's more than the trappings. I think it is specific ideas of value, like Obi-Wan going to somebody who the rest of the Jedi would probably overlook and think of as less than, or many of the Jedi, if not all of them. So I think there are deeper ideas there. But even if it is just the trappings, even if it is just a gateway to go like, hey, have you ever seen the actual original Japanese Godzilla film? It's on HBO Max right now. If you saw the Zilbeast arc and that moved you and you were intrigued by those ideas, why don't you go watch that? If you want to go see, if you're really enjoying Han's absolute resistance to being a part of the larger fight, maybe you want to watch Casablanca and To Have and Have Not with Humphrey Bogart. Maybe you will discover these things. I think one of the reasons it's powerful is exactly what you're saying, is it's a gateway to like all sorts of different storytelling. I think I value it because it's sort of a direct, honest reflection of what I think all creators do, is we take influences around ourselves and we process them through our own perspective to create something new. And sometimes that's just literal, like, I had this family experience and I'm going to write a movie about it, right? Yeah. Or other times it's like, I loved this genre of film when I was a kid, and now I want to write a book inspired by that and try to capture why it made me feel the way I do. But it doesn't come across with, I think, a creator with any skill as just a repeat. It's being processed through that person's experience, through that person's time. I think it's what all creators do up to a point, is build on everything that they loved and experienced. And Star Wars is so direct in that of playing with those influences. I also just think, for me, Star Wars is kind of a love letter to genre. It is sort of saying genre matters. That great ILM documentary, when they are going through all of these different creators who ended up doing a lot of the effects of Star Wars and in revolutionizing the industry and opening up people's imaginations with everything from Indiana Jones to Ghostbusters to, helping with the Abyss to Jurassic Park, on and on and on. Look at the history of all those effects people and sound designers and visual designers when they were kids. They all had they were all spread out in this fan club that they didn't know they were in, because they loved monster movies and they loved science fiction movies, and they were trying to make them in their backyard. Ben Burtt's fan films are hilarious. That Dennis Muren photo where he is a kid, he's this stereotypical 50s kid, Leave It to Beaver look, being chased by a skeleton in a photo he felt compelled to make because he liked horror in stop motion. And just it is taking a sincere love of genre, of everything from pulps to old radio to classic films, that even though those genres at the time that they were being released were definitely being looked down on as less than, for the masses, for the kids, there's something essential about them. The way they reckon with death and excitement, even sexuality, that speaks to people. And I think that's what's being tapped into. Is these genres aren't just trapping. These different genres exist because they tap into specific emotions. They tap into specific ideas. And when Star Wars is successful at interpreting them into the galaxy far, far away, they evoke some of those same emotions that might have drawn people to a Western film or a samurai film or a kaiju film or on, or to just the banter of a classic, bickering couple. Those are specific emotions. Those are specific ideas, and they have value. And we get caught up in the trapping. We get caught up in the ranking of what genre has more value. And I think Star Wars gets us back to just there is value here. There is emotion here. Let's just dive in.
Yeah, let's explore it. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And yes, when you're a kid, you're captured by it. I just remember always thinking, like, I had two choices as a kid: Star Wars or Kramer versus Kramer. That's all I had to watch. And I remember seeing Kramer versus Kramer. Somehow, I don't know, I saw it home. I didn't see it in the theater. I don't remember. And I just remember, like, I don't like this. I'm going to go back to Wizards.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, look, I'm not going to say I like Kramer versus Kramer. It's a unsettling film.
It's an unsettling film, yes.
Yeah. There are plenty of, straightforward non-genre things that I absolutely love, that are absolutely set in the real world. I just think there's room for everything.
Yes, there's room for everything. And I think influences, that's maybe even a second podcast. When I said, like, Star Wars is its own genre, I really do think 7, 8, and 9 wrestle with our lives being under this banner of Star Wars fans. I think that's what I love about it, and the way you've led our conversation on The Last Jedi, being a movie that challenges it all and answers the question of yes, it still values, it still has value, and it's still important. I think that's interesting to see that play out, and I just think sometimes there's this negative connotation of being it's too much like the past, it's too connected, that whole there's nothing new thing, and I don't know, that's I get some of it. Star Killer Base was a third big Death Star, totally get that. Totally get it. There's an even trench run, totally get it. But I think there's so much beyond it, and again, Star Wars is it's its own genre, but it's still a collection of all the influences, and that's great.
Yeah, no, I really love what you're saying, and I understand. I have heard people say, the observation that Lucas, here's this list of other things that Lucas was inspired by. Many of them now considered utter classics, right? Of their various genres. But for the Star Wars sequels, what the creators were inspired by was Star Wars. And I think it's often said as a sort of like, and that is why they aren't good, right? But for me, it's like, yep, maybe there is a risk of imitation, a risk of not being as fresh. Great, we can debate that. But I also think it's just so essential, like exactly what you're saying. Like, yes, that's explicitly not even the theme. It is the theme, but it's also explicitly just the plot.
Yeah.
Our main character lives in the past, literally, in a field of the past. She thinks Luke Skywalker is a myth. I think in engaging with the sequel trilogy as an exploration of what is it to have this thing that was made of other genres become its own genre is a really rewarding way to look at them and analyze them.
Yeah.
All right. We are doing some mini. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's for both generations too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Old and new.
Yeah. The old and the new. Yeah. So we are doing some mini podcasts within our one podcast because we're talking about issues we're passionate about. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to share some specifics of what we love in the more fantastic side of Star Wars. Back in a moment. And we are back to continue our discussion about loving the fantastic side of Star Wars. We're going to talk some specific just favorites. We're not going to do all of the different genres and elements that make up Star Wars because we'd be here for 72 hours straight. But prioritizing, there is a lot of fantasy in Star Wars. So what's a favorite just straight up sword and sorcery fantasy element of Star Wars for you?
I put a lot of things down at like specific moments to help maybe answer this for me there, but I think it is the fantasy element of that that child of nowhere becoming the hero, but that journey isn't what you think. It's this big, giant, sweeping one. But like you mentioned earlier, but like one of my absolute favorite moments. I mean, it's up there if I want to sit down there and actually analyze it of how I'm when I even think, not even watch it, but think about it. But Rey climbing the steps of Octo to find the wizard she didn't even think was real, and now she's part of the story is just still one of my favorite moments. And that's not the end of the journey. And there's still some obstacles and stuff there, but it ties into Luke. It ties not just simply into the hero's journey. And we're all familiar with that and the good parts of it and the bad parts of it and all this we can have those discussions. But I just think that it's a point of view into this story and you can attach so much to it. I am not maybe one-to-one supposed to be represented in the character of Rey, but at the same time, I absolutely am. And so are you all out there. She is for a few and she is for many, as Luke was before, and others will be as the stories keep getting told. And so I just love that. That's just a literal, the stairs, the music, the steps, the moment you and I love earlier of Luke Skywalker. I thought it was and here it is. It's all real. There's just a big fantasy element for me that I love.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, and I think that ties to kind of some straightforward, famous fantasy stuff. Obviously, fantasy can be defined a lot of ways, but a lot of our kind of modern fantasy is just, Lord of the Rings is kind of ground zero, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Rey wrestling in The Last Jedi of like trying to figure out her place in the story, trying to go like, is there anyone else I could hand this lightsaber that symbolizes hope to? I mean, that's kind of right there with Frodo going, I wish this did not have to happen in my time, right? And being like, I know I have to bear this ring, but I wish somebody else could, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is that sort of that this very epic, very fantastic version of this real life thing of growing up. The world is handed to us. We are told what it is by whoever's around us. Mm-hmm. And then we need to become a part of it. And maybe we need to become an important part of it. And maybe there isn't always those other people who handle problems. Becoming an adult means that maybe you're the solution to a specific problem. Mm-hmm. I love it.
Mm-hmm. That's a tough one too.
It's real tough. I don't like it. There's many times where I'm like, I'm with you, Frodo. I'm with you, Rey. In the early part, does somebody else want this?
When you look around, you realize there's no backup. You're the backup.
I thought a lightsaber was cool, but it's responsibility. Can I hand this to someone else?
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. For me, one of the just kind of visual things that is fantastic that I know I've talked to some friends who it's not for them. I love Vader's castle. That is something that, I guess the whole sword and sorcery fantasy element, should start with the lightsabers and the Force, right? That's but that's like the absolute, fundamental. Obi-Wan, being the old wizard who tells Luke, actually magic's real, and here's a cool sword. Pretty sword and sorcery. But as Star Wars developed and kind of took on its own sort of balance between the science fiction and the technical and the spaceships and the fantasy, and Rogue One comes along and it's a little bit more gritty and grounded and all that. And in the middle of this gritty and grounded, here is something just straight up out of Brothers Grimm, right? And I love Vader's castle because it is leaning into fantasy, right? The dark castle is sort of this, it's often where the bad guy lives, and the bad guy is so explicitly bad that his house is scary. His house looks like it wants to stab you, right? Like it's an impossible, imposing, awful tower. It's exciting. It's alluring. You want to get in there, but also you are terrified of it. So it to me represents something very deep. It represents Frodo's journey of like, I don't want to go there, but I have to, because that's a symbol of what is the rot in the world? What is the evil in the world? What is the cruelty in the control and the tyranny in the world? And I have to go into that and face it. So it's got this depth, but then I also just do love that it's blatant. It is not subtle. It is, it's Vader's brooding, angry, stabby monolith to sit over lava and look at the place where he got burned. There's nothing subtle about it. And I love it. He shouldn't live in a mid-century modern house in Palm Springs. He should live in the angriest building possible.
Yeah. I love that it's a lair. I think that I'm with you on this element of just because you talk. I just been watching a lot of not just the Rings of Power TV show, but like we're doing my annual holiday rewatch of the Lord of the Rings films, which I love so much. But it's just like, yeah, it ain't. You look off in the Mordor and you're like, oh, that ain't subtle. And you look at Mustafar, you look at Exegol, you look at these places. I love these belly of the beast moments, and how even to get there, I got across a place called the Dead Marshes, not the Fields of Joy. Like, what are you talking about? That is really part of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great, just I think more modern and to me, I love it even more for being in the middle of more grounded, gritty Rogue One, and in the middle of it, there's still an evil wizard in a dark castle. I love that stuff aesthetically, and I love the meaning that is there if you want to dig for it. And I don't think you need to dig too hard.
No, it's part of the fun.
Do you have more sword and sorcery fantasy thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, a couple, if I may. But I was trying to think one of my favorite recent ones. I was trying to like go into what that means, and I love the Mandalorian meeting Grogu, right? And I was trying to analyze the big why of that, and it's a great plot point, and Dave's famous sketch that he put out there. But it's such a whimsy meets grounded. It's such a fantasy meets sci-fi. You got this armored warrior meeting the cutest thing in the world in the galaxy. It is such a wonderful moment. I love that Star Wars does have a lot of that. It does stop for the beauty. I don't know. It's not necessarily the same, but or one to one. But that's why I love the Leia staring out on Crate for so many reasons, including the decades of pain and loss. But also, it is in the middle of this battle. It is this weird world that you can't. Made of salt, and it's just I love those kind of moments where fantasy does run up against the realities of sci-fi, and Mando just kind of being like, well, what do we got here, and finger going out to touch this creature that needs help that's going to change him. It's a hero's journey moment for sure, but it's truly just an important element to these kind of things. Everyone always at one point the warrior meets the cub.
Yeah, no, and I think we'll see what the fan discussion is like, and in the casual fan discussion is like when Mandalorian season 3 comes out. But that's always been one of the things that I've loved the most about Mandalorian is the show is it wears its heart on its sleeve, right? It's not subtle, it's not buried. It's the core idea of what if cool armor guy meets cute frog baby. This is sort of absurd on its surface, right? But what is the beating heart underneath it? And to me, the absurd makes the profound more powerful, and that's a great example of it. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was because I was like, again, I was listing moments to make me think of the elements, and I ended up putting down 3 or 4 confrontation moments, which ties into what we're talking about it being part of the journey, that there ain't no backup. Sometimes it's you. Confrontations might be the adult world finding you. But Luke giving himself up to go to confront Vader and the Emperor, what that meant. We did the scene by scene of their conversation on the base there before Vader takes him up to the Emperor. But that, I thought of Rey and Finn going away, but knowing they have to turn around, and this is the moment to confront Kylo. A moment of destiny for Rey, a brave moment for Finn of connection and protection. Ahsoka and Vader and Rebels and confronting this hard truth this thing she has to face that clearly still affects her going forward when we meet her again. But also, you and I both love and diving into it was such a value to me. But Yoda confronting himself in the Clone Wars. And learning Qui-Gon giving him what he thinks is maybe a difficult lesson about how to live on, and it's really about going inside and how that's the final part of the journey, including I got to go in that castle, I got to go into that lava planet, I got to go into Mordor, and those kind of confrontation moments that are often selfless and important for all those big elements. And I love that comes up so much in Star Wars because it needs to.
Yeah, I love that you're approaching this from the moment, as well as like just like the images or the tech or whatever. I think a fantasy moment that you're making me think of is Rey in The Rise of Skywalker and her confrontation with the Vexus, the snake, the serpent, right? Because that is one of those moments that's pretty directly fantasy. I mean, very adventure serial, right? They have fallen into a sinking field. We always played that kind of thing as kids in the 80s, right? What if the ground sucked you up? Then they're literally in a dark cavern filled with death and evil knives, and then a serpent appears, right? It's like, let's take every metaphor for going down into a subterranean dark place, and what if you encounter the most evil thing you could find, and it is gonna get you. The whole thing's a nightmare, a fantasy nightmare. And then Rey, everybody has the natural reaction. A giant serpent in underground tunnel, in reality and as metaphor, terrifying, kill it.
Yeah.
And Rey has this strength to see it as another being, and another being that matters. In the way that tells us, the audience, that's who Rey is. You know, it's at least who she's possible of being when she controls her understandable anger. That's who she is. And then she spends the rest of the movie not seeing that version of herself, you know, until the time is right. So it's a great fantasy moment with great power.
Love it.
So let's move on then to the opposite in a way. I don't know if opposite's correct. That'd be a fun thing to debate. Are fantasy and science fiction opposite from one another? I think probably not. I'm going to disagree with myself. Anyway, mini podcast within me asking one question. Here is the question though, Ken. What is a favorite science fiction element of Star Wars?
I think for me, again, looking at some of the moments that lead me to the element is faraway worlds that are a little withdrawn, sterile. There's great thematic purpose to the prisons on Arkina 5. Everyone's making the comparisons to THX 1138, as you should. I think that's the intention there in a lot of ways. But it's not just that. But it's like such a point to that, and it's a world that maybe I can understand a little better. But it's so foreign to me. It's so weird. It's so different. You know, I don't. It's this. It's sci-fi. This vision of the future is often what I think of sci-fi, right? Or here's what a possible future could be. So it's that kind of stuff where it's still mystical, magical. Like a Camino comes to mind, right? Like this lost world, essentially, right? And then Kenobi finds it. It's this rady, mysterious world where they're cloning people. That's science fiction to me, but it's this. It's just these places your mind goes. Even arriving on Mandalore in the Clone Wars is so sci-fi. It's a covered city on a barren wasteland of a planet. Cloud City is not unlike that for me, where your lonely cloud car pilot is over there waiting. Sunny Day Boy. I think I go to that kind of stuff, not to simply put sci-fi into Blade Runner, right? But that comparison gets made a lot. And I didn't love Blade Runner. Wasn't that was a weird Han Solo movie. I don't love that one. I don't, as a kid, that wasn't what I gravitated to, and some people do. My buddy Scott Mann's big Star Wars fan, but he's a Star Trek and Blade Runner fan first. I think that stuff speaks to him, and I think the sci-fi stuff. Every time I think of it, the elements are these worlds I don't quite understand.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that approach. I think there's a balance of fantasy and science fiction. I think that for me, for my definition, the fantasy noun of Star Wars is that's more the underpinning. But I think some of the brilliance of it is to kind of merge. Hey, if you like Star Trek and you like Lord of the Rings, what if they were kind of mashed together where this feels ancient and it literally happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? There's a storybook vibe, but within the storybook, they have spaceships and blasters that go pew, 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 like your phasers. And sometimes the doors make noise too, just like in Star Trek, I think bringing that science fiction element into the fantasy element was one of the huge, triumphs of Star Wars. So when I look at the science fiction elements, I sometimes do just kind of look at the technology in the surface, but I do think it's really interesting to look at those ideas because, science fiction is almost always looking forward either to the possibility of a utopia, which Star Trek has elements of, but then also it's become so popular, the dystopia of the warning of where we could be heading, but a lot of it is often connected to this was at some time real. This is a possible future of our world. Whereas Star Wars is something that happened a long time ago. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but some of those just kind of science fiction elements that I love is the holograms,
Mm-hmm.
particularly just when one person is sending a message, the little warbly sound effect when they come up, the glitches, in no matter how many times I see that sort of a shimmering blue person with that warbly science fiction tech noise, it never gets old. It always has a magic to me, because I think it's one of the things we always look forward at in science fiction is some of the huge the advancements that truly change us are sometimes technical, power based, but a lot of times it's communication based.
Yeah.
So science fiction having such a history in what is communication going to look like in the future, and how might it change the way we can communicate. I think that's such a science fiction element. It's not just the tech; it's that sort of fascination with what does the future of communication look like.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, because even a couple times just in Andor, this grounded show, like they have to adhere to that, right? But it's still Star Wars, so the hologram Marv at the end, it was a wonderful use of this tech. We've just kind of become so used to, I guess, and it's so a few steps away from reality, you would see.
And we were catching up with so much science fiction. It's just hilarious at this point. Our phones being so much smaller than the communicators on Star Trek, and like, you just use those for communicating and nothing else. Okay. The droids, right? The robots, right? The robots used to be kind of pretty firmly science fiction, right? Frodo's not encountering any protocol droids. So I think that just that whole element of the droids starting off is kind of they're the perspective characters in A New Hope, as we've talked about a bunch, but then kind of going on to like, okay, they develop personalities. Okay, maybe a lot of our main heroes have been quite dismissive
Yes.
to their individuality. That's really getting into some, it's fun and cool and they're fascinating, but on just an aesthetic science fiction level, but it's also getting into these science fiction ideas of what is the moral responsibility of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, or cloning.
Or cloning. Yeah, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Final one for me is hyperspace, right? Like, especially in the first film, right? It's a lot like going to warp speed in Star Trek at first glance, at first blush, of how are you going to travel across these vast, empty regions of space to get from point A to point B as fast as the narrative needs. But then as it develops, it also becomes a little fantasy of like, yes, hyperspace. It's technology based. You need numbers to compute it. You need people to go out and be pioneers and discover it and figure out how it works. Also, none of us know what it is.
Yeah, but
it's another dimension. The whales do. The whales organically, the Purgles organically know what it is. But the rest of us, like, real handy. Is this another dimension? Yeah. Is this the afterlife? What are we flying through? I love that you can be so far advanced in technology. Like, we have untapped powers that we have no idea what their actual meaning is. We know what their function is, but we don't know what they truly are. Yeah,
I kind of love what you're making me think of. I kind of love when Star Wars collides with itself there, in this wonderful fashion of, hyperspace is both unexplainable and you can attempt to explain it. But I'm thinking about parts and ships, right? The amount of like, well, we need a hyperdrive motivator's gone. Give me the the wrench there. Give me all. Like it's so real, but it's so spacey. Like it's just trying to tinker with the fantasy. I love that.
Yeah, no, and in a way, I think that's the things that can get this great mashup of the utterly fantastic, because with the very real, because writers for films and television shows, the part's broken, need to shout out what it is, and then you got people writing cross sections going, I'm going to make this work.
I'm going to make it work.
Yeah, great stuff. Any other thoughts on the science fiction before we move on?
No. Let's escape the prisons of science fiction.
Yeah, now let's get weird. Let's get freakish. What's a favorite just kind of weird, freakish, I can't believe I'm seeing this on screen, alien creature or world?
I'll start here. We started a conversation here. Don't ever overlook Jabba's palace. I know Jennifer Land well. I know you will. Don't ever overlook it. The cantina gets all the press. I get it. But I love that they came back in 83 and were like, let's do this again. Let's ramp it up as best we can. No special needed here yet. We're going to go bigger. Jabba's palace is just wonderful, and it's weird, and it's freakish around every corner, whether it's warts or a monument or Gamorrean guards. They're big, bulky pigs that will fight you. What's happening? It's timeless. We're coming up on 40 years now. That's crazy. But so again, it's that thing where I think it just becomes wallpaper, but it's bizarre in the most wonderful of ways. I'll start there, but also it's hard for me not to say Mortis. You talk about worlds, like I focus on the worlds more than the creatures. I'll throw Bor Gullet in there as well as a creature, but hard not to say Mortis for me, because it begs you to leave some answers. It knows you have questions, but it begs you to leave the answers at the door. Is this a real place, imagined place? Where's the time? Why does it, it's like World Between Worlds too. And it's freakish. There's floating mountains, and there's this angelic creature leading you around, her devilish brother, this wizard like father.
Turning into birds.
And you're like, what is really happening here? And it's like, shh, you don't really know. Which is why another fantasy element I love too in Star Wars is the vision, right? The crazy prophecies and stuff like that. And you need places like that to have it maybe hit with even more impact. And those two worlds I go to all the time.
Oh yeah, I like that. I like the visions, and I like how much the visual language built up of that sort of rushing blur around the edge. That's obviously there in the prequels, but then gets picked up a bunch in various animated shows. I realize that there's a specific glass that I drink my water from in the morning, that if I stare at the bottom of the glass, it looks like I'm having a Star Wars vision.
Yeah, just you expect Obi-Wan's face to appear in it.
Just get a frightening premonition about how the podcast is going to go, things like that. There's so much weird, freakish alien creatures in worlds that are just exciting and weird. A couple that jump out to me, you mentioned it because it's a real early one, and I think it's an early one that fired my imagination, because it was when I was very young. I just accepted it. It's part of the story. And then as I got a little older, it's like, why is that there? In a fun way, which is the Dianoga, right? We're on this technological terror, this sterile ball of death and doom, and then they fall into the garbage compactor, which is all like, approaching this adult, all like very practical, like, garbage has got to go somewhere. And Leia's smart enough to know the way the system's built and all that. But then within that, there is a thing living in there, and it maybe wants Luke for something, but maybe decided to let him go.
Yeah.
And just all you get of it, that tentacle and then the weird eye, just it fires your imagination. And writers have, in various books and short stories, have filled in some interesting takes on the Dianoga. But for me, its value as just what is that and why is it there? Just a absolute imagination fuel. I love the Dianoga as that.
I just rewatched that scene this morning because I was trying to remember. I had one of those because I'm such bad with Star Wars quotes. It's like, who says something's alive in here? Is it Luke first, Leia first? Like, and I just thank you, Disney Plus. Let me rewatch. And it is absolutely one of the first big moments of fantasy in Star Wars as a kid. Robots, all the stuff we're talking about. But yeah, you're whiz banging along, and then there's a monster in the.
Yeah, it's a solid one. I got to bring up one of my very favorites and a little bit more recent, and that is the singer from Star Wars, who I used to call Vat Weirdo before I knew his name. I knew his name now is Lulilo Primuck. Just a great example of taking something from the real world, a jazzy lounge singer, and in particular a duo of them, and going, great, instead of just kind of having a guy in a suit, how can we make this as alien and strange as possible? And this sort of upside down froggy blob with a floating in a vat with a microphone that is somehow picking up beautiful, clear, dulcet tones, not warbly underwater merman from He-Man tones. Beautiful, deep, compelling tones. And it's just a background thing. It's just hey, this is normal in this fantastic world. So around every corner, there's something this weird and fun. That to me is the magic.
I mean, I truly think Dryden's Yacht and Party is a wonderful mashup of genres served up as Star Wars. It hits a lot of it,
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Do you have any more?
I mean, I could list aliens along the way here. I will. Yeah, I'll just close to say, going back to Jabba's palace, but the Rancor terrified me. Terrified me. And so I still go back to it as one of my favorites, which is why I needed and was moved by Danny Trejo's speech about the Rancor, both in fantasy and the real world.
Yeah. In the picture of Yoda, everything that we get the Rancor as loyal friend. You help with Boba Fett riding him. We get misunderstood beast going on a rampage, kaiju King Kong stuff, and then we get it's just another being who needs to be soothed. We get so much Rancor goodness in one episode of Book of Boba Fett.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. A couple of locations, I can go on and on. I do love Camino, that it is this ocean world constantly under a storm. But then springing out of it is these cold technological things with 1950s space aliens in them. It's a great mashup of influences, But very recently, I think it's really firing my imagination because we don't yet know the name, and it looks like a place out of a dream. I love Stabby Rock Fightin' Moon in Kenobi, where Kenobi and Vader have their standoff. It just is like, hey, we can have in the galaxy far, far away any environment we want. So let's go to environments sometimes that really feel like what is happening here. It's a Stabby Rock emotion, so it's a Stabby Rock planet.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite designs, and sometimes as I've been somewhat critical of stagecraft, the volume, the potential is just wonderful, and that is a great example of it. If we can just go here, and what's here, don't worry about it, it's here.
Yeah, it evokes the wonder of I want to know more, because it so just looks like the cover of like a paperback from the 70s that I'd find at a favorite used bookstore and go, I know nothing about this. I don't know what that planet is. It makes me want to know more. Last one for me, it's a little less freakish, but it's a little bit more fun building on the real world. You mentioned Mandalore. I love Mandalore. I've got these postcards, these fake Star Wars postcards that they sell at Galaxy's Edge that say, visit the domed cities. I love that they're domed cities, and I love the idea that they took off visually in Clone Wars and just went with it. What if a whole planet just loved the hell out of Picasso? What if it just, they're like, cubism is so great, we're even going to trim the plants that way. I love how all in they are on that aesthetic.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You have talked about your fear of the old Rancor. Let's talk more fear and horror. What's a favorite sort of nightmarish horror fantastic element in Star Wars?
I mean, the creature coming for you is a big one there. It started with the Rancor, then, not for nothing, but the Wampa jumping out of Luke was another one that scared me. But the kind of the creatures you can't explain. I guess I'm going to locations a lot today, but the opening of Rise of Skywalker is a little horror film for me. But it also highlights that it's the nightmare at the end of the hallway, I guess. It's Palpatine returning in this case. I think Palpatine becoming the Emperor in Revenge of the Sith. I've told that story of kids behind me at the Cinerama Dome screaming at the top of their lungs, being electrocuted. True horror. I think of Mother Talzin as just a witch in Star Wars, as a classic horror kind of trope. I think of those the what goes bump in the night. And it's the great big evil. And I think the Sith themselves are kind of even that. And I love that kind of angle of it there. The places going to the Exegals, going to the Mustafars, as sci-fi and what we talked about earlier, but also the way they're just presented is nightmarish. And I love that.
Yeah, no, I think those are absolutely great picks. I so love Exegol. I think it is blatantly designed to be, yes, let's lower ourselves down into the depths, the pit of the most awful thing that we have to face, which is, what Rey does. It's dangerous to get there. It's dangerous to be on the surface. It's extra dangerous to descend. But then aesthetically, the lightning shooting up from this tortured planet, that great echoing fingers on chalkboard sound is one of the best things. But in terms of just pulling from genres, I feel like what's great about Exegol is it's just like, hey, what if Mad Dr. Frankenstein's lab was in Mordor? Let's slap those two together, because it's like early 30s, a mad scientist straight out of original Frankenstein with an unnatural, half-dead monster hanging there from a hook, but it's all in the dark fantasy land that you must go to confront your darkest truth.
Just that lightning. You're right. The lightning, the sounds, the statues, the choice to make everything larger than life and dwarf everyone else sliding in there. I love that. I just love it.
Yeah, so good, so good. I love the horror, so I could go on and on. I so agree with you with the Night Sisters, kind of all of them playing with this idea of witches, and I think there's more to be explored with the Night Sisters. Totally. Everybody loves Merrin from Jedi Fallen Order, and I'm right there with them on loving Merrin. But I do think it's having fun with kind of the aesthetic. They're complicating the idea of Star Wars, of what is their relationship to the dark side. They are tapping into it, but they're not going out and trying to conquer the galaxy. They're just living their lives as far as we get to see. But the way they are treated by Sidious, by Dooku, by the Sith, by they can't exist. They can't have their power starts to tap into some really deep stuff. About actual witch stories and feminine power. And so there's all sorts of great stuff there. But then just on the surface, like Mother Talzin's great doubled voice, and the fact that she is using some level of magic just to make kind of the bits of her cowl dress float constantly. Like just that, like, Are you casting a spell constantly to do that? What's going on with that? Do you have fans in your dress? How are you doing that?
Yeah. This is what I love. This is what I love. In a world in which Andor is running around having grounded adventures, Mother Talzin existed in it. Love it.
Can you imagine Andor just crashing on into the Night Sisters? Like, come on, that would be amazing. Final one for me, going back to one of the originals. I like the special edition change, but in a way, the original is even more frightening. It's the Sarlacc. As a kid, you'd be like, cool, great, awesome. I was so like you. I was so about that Luke flip. That catch the lightsaber is probably one of will always be one of my top favorite moments in Star Wars. But just appreciating the creativity of like, okay, well, it'd be kind of cool. We got to try to execute Han, Luke, and Chewie, and then they get out of it, and it's this big hero moment, right? Okay. Well, would it be fun? Well, it'd be kind of cool to have them walk the plank like old school pirates. But we're on a desert. What are they going to do? Fall into the sand? Maybe we could have some stabby rocks. Like, no. What if there was a mouth in the desert?
On the desert,
and it's been developed. You can go see it at Galaxy's Edge. You can Google the cross section. You can see the mouth and the rest of the body and all that. And now we got to see visually Boba down in the guts of it. We're just really going back to 1983. Like, there are teeth in the desert.
Yeah.
It's so terrifying.
Yeah, I think it's a little while. I fought the Little Shop of Horrors version later on, the special editions, because I just was like, that's too much of an answer. It's too much of an answer. I'm fine with it now. And by the way, I think the Book of Boba Fett and added to not only the Sarlacc itself, but it has its own wonderful little horror sequence when they're there, him and Fennec, and he goes to get revenge on the monster in the desert. But that's a horror sequence I love.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As we begin to wind down here, just got a couple more questions because we could be here all day. What's a favorite silly, maybe more outrageous, meant to be kind of comedic on the surface, absurd element of Star Wars that you love?
So it's not necessarily the creatures, but the first moment I go to, because it's so funny because you and I both have those moments where occasionally I bump up to the real world humor, or it's not even the words, but sometimes the cadence is very modern, or squeeze me, we always say. How outrageous it's silly is that the Ewoks are trying to cook Han while they're whistling. It's bizarre. It's so out there. It's like, it's one to say the Ewoks eat people. Got it. They're happy and they're dancing and they're whistling a little workaday tune while Han's trying to blow it out. That hit me as a kid. If I was an adult, I probably would have been like, what is this? This isn't Star Wars to me. But as a kid, it made it part of the template. It made it part of the template. I didn't question a lot of that stuff going forward. A little bit later on, again, you get a little older, maybe you lose touch with that. Some of the lines, I don't have a problem with the big ass door, but there's, the boyfriend comes up a lot. It's not necessarily the words, it's how it's delivered. It's of its time. But that is just, I kept looking at this question this morning. I'm like, what is, all right, yeah, I could go to Jar Jar moments. I could go to this and that. But I'm like, they whistled while they were cooking them.
And that really brings up the point of, is it a part of the tradition? Because it seems to be that's something that's kind of being directed by Logray, right?
Yeah.
That you get the vibe they've done this before. Is this something that is cultural or culinary that they don't try to slit Han's throat first? Like, better if you cook him alive. Is that cultural, or do they just feel human meat is better when cooked alive?
You want the blood coursing through the meat there,
Yeah, that is one of the sillier jokes, right? Han tries to blow out the torch, but you scratch the silly and you find some dark stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great pick. A couple of aliens jumped out at me. The two Cantina creatures spread across the mist of time from A New Hope to The Mandalorian, who are just big bugs. They're praying mantis type people. The one from the original Cantina scene is the creature's proper name is Kitak Kidkak. Again, another name I feel like I maybe just, did I say a swear word in the process of saying that character's name? Maybe I did. Kitak Kidkak was a female Yamri from the planet Hook. And then just leaning into it, that character that we meet in season 2. I guess we see them first in season 1, but spend some quality time with in Mandalorian season 2, Dr. Mandible. Right? That is Star Wars just going like, okay, well, we only had so much of a budget. Yeah. The vision wasn't, Lucas had it, but in the amazing stressful process of making New Hope, maybe it wasn't entirely refined. So you got some amazing, groundbreaking designs of aliens like Greedo and the Rhodians, and then there's a giant bug at the bar. Yeah. And Star Wars' willingness to just embrace it, being like, yeah, sometimes aliens are kind of pig guys, or bunny guys, and sometimes it's just that's a praying mantis.
And again, this speaks to why for years I just was like, Jackson. And then I love that short story to be like Jackson going, but why not me? A praying mantis? You have a squid or a shrimp run around fighting for the rebellion? Why not me? A rabbit. It was one of those ones I had no argument against because I've celebrated some of these other things.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then for me, one of the other outrageous, silly elements is also an element that is combined with great depth and meaning. And I love the intersection in Star Wars. I think the Sith are terrifying. The idea of how the Sith become the Sith and the lies they tell themselves and the pain they go through and the horror of the, relationship of the master and the apprentice and the rule of two, all that stuff is deeply meaningful. It can be deeply scary, but on this sort of surface level, it's absolute fun fantasy with an amazing lack of subtlety, right? I mean, just the fact that Palpatine is just a wizened old dark wizard. But the element that I take very seriously, but also enjoy having fun with, is the Darth names.
Yeah.
They can have individual meaning. But like Darth Tyrannus is with for Count Dooku is both the cartoonish, but also the history of Tyrannus kind of relates to his role as a count and why he fell and all that. But yeah, Sidious, Maul. It's not a Darth name, but everybody loves Savage Opress, or I should say loves to hate the blatantness of the name Savage Opress. I remember conversations of people being like, we're going to learn where the name Darth Vader came from. And I love the way Palpatine's just like, you don't get a vote in this. I made a list of bleeping badass names, and this was next on the list. I dub you Darth Vader. I know there, I'm sure plenty of explorations of the meaning. There's the whole father thing and whether that was intended or not, all that. But I'm just talking about just a surface level viewing of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
Just the Vader's next on the list. I love the idea that that Sidious is planning this elaborate conquering of the galaxy, manipulating people's fears, and then he also just has a data pad where he's jotting down scary sounding names.
I love this because it's the greatest henceforth in the history of the world. But do you think this starts the troubled relationship between master and apprentice on the Sith side, where this isn't like you got elected pope and you get to choose your papal name? This is like your master gets to choose it, and so you spend the whole time going, "Oh, that wouldn't have been my name." And the divide begins early.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is really about you know what you signed up for. This isn't about you having a lot of agency. You were assigned this name. Yeah. It's a funny sketch to think of, a comedy sketch to think like Vader approaches him about 10 years into being a Sith Lord and be like, I had a lot on my mind when you gave me that name. Could I maybe consider what I would like to be called?
Yeah. I was going to be Darth Gruesome. I was really going with that one. Yeah.
Too close to General Grievous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe it's a great summary of my taste, and I recognize everybody has different taste. I love when the absolute depth of meaning. I don't want anybody to take this like I don't take the story of Palpatine and Vader and their relationship seriously. I don't take the name of Vader seriously. Vader is a name that rings out. It has weight and meaning in the Star Wars galaxy. The shadow of Vader is everywhere in the sequel trilogy. Vader has meaning in our real world. I take it very, very, very seriously. But then I also want to be able to embrace it as it has this fantasy history to it that makes it fun and weird and fun to joke about. And it can be both at the same time.
Absolutely.
So look into the future, Ken, for our final question. What sort of new frontiers of fantastic or weird do you hope to see in Star Wars?
I would love to see, there's so much that's been covered, but I want to see kind of a full on adventure. We've had moments of Indiana Jones in Star Wars, including some stuff in Clone Wars with the Jar Jar stuff, with Mace in season 6, elements of Rise of Skywalker, but a full on gallivanting, going around, getting things you need, whether it was mysterious items, helping others along the way. And Afra's a character that has a lot of those elements, the archaeological side. But maybe she needs to clean up her morals just a little bit. And I love that character, by the way. But something like that. That's just full on 1934 serial adventure to me. And the elements have been all the way through. But you know what I mean? Like just give me that. Give me that.
No. I'm right there with you. I think that's one of the things that I want is I think maybe the imaginative and the fantastic of Star Wars can start to feel muted when we're always traveling with characters who they know this place already, or they're aware of this place, right? And so it looks fantastic to us, but it's not as fantastic as discovering it with the character.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit of the power of what you're talking about is a lot of the power to me of fantasy, of science fiction is imagination. It's what else is out there, right? Frodo is going into parts of the world that he never imagined he'd see.
Yeah.
Kirk and Spock and Picard and now Michael and the newest iterations of Star Trek, they all want to know what's out there. What have they not encountered before? Yeah. So I would love to see in the sort of Dr. Aphra-esque explorer tapping into Star Wars heroes encountering worlds and beings and philosophy that they did not know existed. They don't fully understand. Just really tapping into that sense of adventure, of wonder, of mystery. And because it's Star Wars, ultimately, hopefully, empathy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
As bizarre and otherworldly as this is, there's also something here that I can ultimately understand.
Yeah, and get from these cultures and worlds too, to make sure you don't flip too far to the savior tropes, which along the way are they are what they are at times, unfortunately. But yeah, we're just kind of I love what you're saying about this exploration of what's actually there. Add a ticking time bomb of a script writing clock to it of some kind of adventure, and make it give me that whiz bang. And again, all this stuff is in Star Wars, and that's one of the things I love about Pasaana. I'm like, yeah, you got Poe. Poe looks like he could be hanging out with Indiana Jones. Like,
yeah,
I'm there for that. I just love that character, and I got Indiana Jones movies to get that from, and a fifth one on the way. But to have Star Wars, and it's not just straight up Indiana Jones, by the way, but it is that kind of Alan Quartermain and like, give me that.
Yeah. You know what? The final thing I'll say, one of my favorite beats in Empire Strikes Back is when Luke has his vision.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking to Yoda about what he saw, and he says, "I saw a city in the clouds."
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the spirit of like, what else could be out there that I don't know, that I don't understand?
Yeah.
I would love to keep capturing that feeling of, I saw a city in the clouds. Just great, exciting stuff to me.
Indeed.
And also, I hope that Andor absolutely does just straight up travel to Bespin. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, look, we still got to get Andor in front of Jabba. A lot of people want to get Diego at that moment, so.
Andor and Jabba in Bespin. That's what we're calling for here on ForceCenter. Any final thoughts from you, Ken?
No. Been a ton of fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. We haven't been doing as much of our kind of straightforward deep dive episodes like this because our deep dives have been into the wonderful, wonderful show that is Andor. So it's been fun to get back to them. That is it, though, Ken. Where can people find us?
Hey, you can find us on Twitter at ForceCenter Pod, on Hive Social at ForceCenter. We are on Instagram and YouTube as well, as we said up top. Thanks to those who have subscribed. We'd love to have you join us over there from time to time. New content coming on the way over there. Facebook page is ForceCenter Podcast. Podcast available on Acast, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and more. Merch available at tpublic.com/user/ForceCenter and patreon.com/ForceCenter is where you can support us directly. For me, you can go to my website, Napzok.com. Information on all the things I do. I've got my book for sale right now. Personalized copies available directly from the website. Check the shop category. You can get other things to do like Pop Rock and Radio, Casterly Talk, and more. Joseph, where can they find and follow you?
Yeah, you can find me on all the social media as at Joseph Scrimshaw. I'm promoting Hive Social in particular. I love the functionality. I love the people who are there. So if you want to enjoy a little bit more joking around, a little bit more talking about different people's artwork, celebrating things, that's what's going on right now at Hive Social. We'll see how long it lasts, but come find me there is at Joseph Scrimshaw. I am still on Twitter, also on Instagram, TikTok, all as at josephscrimshaw.com. You can also check out my YouTube page while you are kindly subscribing to ForceCenter. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel as well. It's listed at the bottom of the ForceCenter page. Made a short film recently called Peace Fight. I've got some more short films that I'm working on, not literally as we speak, but as soon as we're done recording, got to get back to work on those. So more coming. Thank you all for listening. So for myself, for Ken, for the Rancor in the Dianoga, this has been ForceCenter.